Greetings and salutations. Unfortunately for you, I am back with another video. This one is a little bit more personal. Um, this one is everybody's starting to put forward some of these videos of their introduction to their hobby and into the hobby of role playing games and so on and so forth. And it usually comes about from stories of children back in the 80s, growing up with He Man, growing up watching G.I. Joe, and uh, having a sibling or cousin that happened to be into Dungeons and Dragons, and running upon usually Mold Bay or perhaps even the advanced Dungeons and Dragons books, and therefore setting about on 40 plus years of adventure, in some cases, some even up to 50 years, starting with OD&D. I don't have any of that. Um, so instead, I will bring about some of my personal little story about this. So, I was born in 1989, which, for those of you keeping track, means I will be 36 this year. So, I'm definitely on the younger end of most of the people that are in this hobby, at least in this niche of the hobby. Dungeons and Dragons always fascinated me because I was always into like nerdy fantasy stuff. In fact, I was a very avid reader. When I was a kid, I tested the highest reading score in the state of Kentucky and won a trip to the NASA space camp for a couple days. It was an overnight trip to Alabama. And when I say the highest reading score, I mean the highest reading score. I beat high schoolers at the age of 10. So, um, when we talk about Dungeons, it wasn't like it was the Satanic Panic. That's not what that thing was. Although my generation did kind of experience a little bit of it with the Harry Potter thing. It was like that. I'm sure that was um, it was on a much smaller scale to some degree, although book burnings were a thing. Despite growing up in a holiness Pentecostal family, I didn't experience that kind of stuff. By and large, my parents were on the more chill end of things. Um, my dad operated with the idea of if we push him against it or we pull him against it, he's going to push back harder. So all we can really do is just let him enjoy what he can, but also if we are concerned, let him know what our concerns are. And for the most part, that I mean, it worked out pretty good. Now I was pretty anti-religious all the way up until I was an adult. So, however, I became a Christian as an adult. So, but that's a story for another day. Um, so that particular part of philosophy, that philosophical approach to parenting, very much worked in a lot of ways. And in fact, Dad was always kind of he liked video games, and the first video game that I remember playing was The Legend of Zelda, and then we got a Super Nintendo, and it was a Link to the Past, Legend of Zelda, and so that one was much more dialogue heavy than the first game was. We didn't have the second game, Link's Adventure. We didn't have that, so or Adventure Link, I think. So we had a Link to the Past, and I remember playing it. Me and my dad would take turns, which is funny because there's three save files. But it was cool to like play along with dad with this very single player game. And I remember telling my dad I wanted him to teach me how to read because I didn't want him to read everything for me. And that's actually where a lot of my reading came from. I remember that game was the first time I had ever heard the word augment. So there you go. Um, but that being said, I was always more of a video gamer, and in fact, this channel was a video game channel. Um, I've often gone into this a few of my videos, but my channel was primarily a Dark Souls channel, associated with the Reformed Gamers podcast and Facebook group. And Logan gave me the blessing of, portraying the banner and stuff like that. Those old videos don't exist anymore because at the time when everything started kind of falling apart, both in the group and with my relations with the admin team that had stepped up in Logan's place, I had deleted most of them. Although a couple of the videos still exist, I think the oldest one that exists is my fight with the Orphan of Cause in Bloodborne. So with my broccoli headed build with the Moonlight Greatsword. So if you want to see that, there it is. You just got to comb through the channel for it. But at the time too, my channel name kept changing. And I did talk a lot about theology and philosophy because, this was a theological podcast and Facebook group. And so it was originally I named the channel Papa Rex because I was a dad for the first time in my life whenever I created the channel. Then I changed it, and T Rex was my nickname at work at the time, at my old job. Then I changed it to the Stoic Reformed Rex. That name didn't stay for very long. And then whenever I started kind of playing around with different ideas and making this channel more like a blog, and I used to talk about firearms too, but with the craziness about firearms on YouTube, I don't display my stuff anymore. So I've lost them in a boating accident. Anyway, tragic story. Anyways, I changed my name to Kentucky Rex. At the time I did that, I was still talking about firearms. And Kentucky had become a constitutional carry state, meaning that if, for those of you that don't live in such a state, it means that basically as long as you can pass a background check for purchasing the firearm in the first place, you're allowed to carry it however you see fit, be it open carry, in a sling or in a holster on your hip outside the waistband, or um, carrying it concealed, and which I was a huge proponent of. Um, I did open carry for many years, but I was much more a fan. When it came to my handguns, it was I'd much rather throw a shirt over it. Um, you got less people looking at you sideways. So, and it just it fit better too because I like to appendix carry up front. So like and you can't really do that very well outside the waistband because most holsters are not for outside the waistband are not really tailor made for getting around the belt buckle. So you have to play with the belt buckle, and even then, like at that point, what's the point? Because you're still trying to pull in a certain way. Anyways, I'm talking about stuff you don't care about. Anyway, during the time of uh, a specific disease and event in a particular year that will not be named, um, a lot of people started being shut in. And at the time, I worked as a tooling mechanic at an automobile parts factory. Um, we were providers for um, insulated car parts for the big three in Michigan. So when all three of our customers went, and the UAW had put them off work because of the unnamed event, we no longer had customers to sell any parts to. So therefore, we were all essentially laid off. So while I was drawing unemployment, but we were assured that we were getting called back at that time. And I did eventually go back that time. I had a lot of free time on my hands. And talked to a buddy, and I was introduced to the hobby originally through 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And because I'd always been interested in it, now I didn't know anything about the differences between editions yet. But I watched a lot of YouTube videos, these people talking about all their experiences and stuff like that, and it seemed, oh, that seems cool and awesome, and this, that, and everything else. And the guy who ran 5th edition, he ran us through the Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is a good module. And, it's fun. As time went on, though, I started noticing something about the mechanics, and that was, you know, these stories that I had been watching and reading on, talking about death and treachery and and all that. This doesn't feel like that. And then that's when I started figuring out, the difference with editions. I had assumed incorrectly at the time that really all it was they were just remarketing the same kind of game from 1974 all the way up to today, just with different artwork and stuff like that. And I don't know why I thought that. It's just what I assumed. So I started looking into more different things. What originally got me into the OSR was actually the prospect of solo gaming. I'd seen a lot of people solo game on YouTube, and I thought that was interesting. And so a particular rule set kept coming up over and over and over again through these videos that dealt with solo gaming. And that is, of course, bring it out here. Basic Fantasy. And this is my first copy. It is dog-eared. It's stained on the sides. I've had many sessions run. And that's why I started getting into, while solo gaming seemed fun, as I kept reading along, I was like, it'd be fun to play this with other people, though. And so that's when I started playing it with my buddies, and, because they had never played before. Well, there was one that played before with third edition, but he had never played a basic expert retro clone or iteration of the game. So he was interested in that too. And while they weren't huge on it because of the bare bones nature of what BX is, in terms of character customization, they were big fans in the simplicity of the system. There was none of this really complex, weird mechanic that they had. It didn't feel like you were trying to sit down with the Bible and cram all 66 books into your brain to get ready for a game. That's my issue with a lot of these modern games. That it feels like you would have a much easier time reading the whole entire New Testament and then going to the table than it would be trying to read some of those rules, because of how complex and weird and so many contingencies within the rules. It's ridiculous. And that brings me to the YouTube side. I originally posted my video because my first video on this hobby talked about the mention of the Forsaken Necromancer. At the time, I was running Morgansport in a Discord channel, and I had added a lot to it. I had the 3 basic dungeons from that game, plus a couple of extra ones I had thrown in, and I threw in a nasty orc that I named Thundertusk, who was a slaver, and I put him in the countryside as a wandering monster encounter. And I also used a couple of places from the anthology books, like the Darkfur Castle and stuff like that, and Brymasson and all that stuff. So I placed all this stuff in there, and even though that campaign didn't last longer than 6 or 7 months, it was still fun while it lasted. So we didn't get through the whole thing that I had ready, raring to go. It was still fun, but the mention of the Forsaken Necromancer, out of everything that I had ran, and I chalk it up to the fact that it was probably my creation. I think that when you create something, because you don't have to memorize as much, like you don't have to read through an entire module to know how your adventure works, it feels more fluid and it feels more faster paced, I think. So that was definitely the most well received, and that's why I posted my video about it. And at the time, I didn't know how to make a dungeon map very well. I thought you just put a bunch of different shapes with different sizes together, and that made a dungeon. So I had very rudimentary knowledge of dungeon design, which was very, very bare minimum. But I did put some interesting traps and some interesting encounters in it. And I put some. Now, I would say that it was one of those things where it was definitely. It was definitely not perfect, but it was very well received, and it made for really good content on my YouTube channel first thing. And I have to give a shout out to Fred Daniel because that was the first man who ever subscribed to my channel when I came to this hobby. And so I'm indebted to you, Fred, because you're the first one that got things moving. So I appreciate it. Um, a lot of my subscribers from my Reformed Gamers days have not stayed with me. A few of them still subscribe, but a lot of them, when they figured out I wasn't doing Dark Souls streams hardly anymore, they kind of left. But I'm rambling now. Anyways, so for those of you who haven't watched the original video, this was a romp. I used the Zombrair from the field guide, and I made essentially a sort of pseudo necromancer for a low level encounter. Threw in some zombies, threw in some skeletons, and I basically what I did was I placed the party in a situation they were going to go find this missing acolyte from the Church of Ptah in Morgansfort. He had disappeared. He's been gone for over a year. He went to go do like a house blessing or something like that by a figure that they only knew as Tobin, and he never came back. And they were given an address. The guards didn't go because this orc slaver that's running roughshod through the countryside's got everybody scared. Um, they didn't send any more of the church people because Father Felbane had been was very old and infirm, and most of the clergy were very low level to begin with and wouldn't have fared any better, and he didn't want to lose any more because he was a very kindly old man, and he viewed these people like they're his own children. So they go there, and it's this whole thing where the first room they run into, it's funny because we had a paladin and he tried to turn the undead, and so he just shouts like a maniac and it doesn't work. He holds his holy symbol up, shouts, and it doesn't work because he doesn't realize that paladins at first level can't turn undead yet. And I didn't tell him that either. I just let him figure that. It was just very funny. So, and this is a sizable party, by the way. And so everybody's going through and they're finding all these notes dealing with the kidnapping. And so all the servants, and then it turns out that the servants had finally decided they were going to turn on the master of the house. And basically, the master of the house had been disguising himself as Tobin, and so he had trapped his actual soul inside of a soul jar kind of contraption in the room. And so when he decided he was done with that, he put the soul back into the soul jar and let the husk of the body just lie there and be decrepit. Meanwhile, the acolyte was alive, but he was very very much his own body was kind of trapped. His own soul was trapped in a soul jar, and it's like, look, like I don't know how the logistics of this work. This made for a very interesting little adventure. But there was also this cauldron, and the party had to be careful because if they got too close, it would do this. They would have to make a save. And being honest with you, most of them would not be able to make that save if they got too close because then their own soul would be trapped. And so they eventually kind of ran through and got through some of the traps, and they eventually found the necromancer. They killed him very fast, but you know, like there was disembodied spirits singing, and like I'm a huge fan of B movies, B horror flicks, and like this was just my love letter to that. And it was campy and ridiculous in some spots. In fact, that like I would go like over the top, like there's a term in pro wrestling called kayfabe, and so that's essentially what I was doing was like doing like this character thing with this kayfabing it up. You know, like I'm trying to present you something to suspend your disbelief, so that like you can at least have, yeah, you know, looking, if you were an outsider looking in, you'd be like, this is just over the top and hammy and this, that, and everything else. But when you're a player in something like that, it's a little different. When you're directly involved, you're willing to put that kind of stuff aside. So essentially, even though no, I have not been in the hobby anywhere near as long as what a lot of people have been, and in fact, many people have been in the hobby longer than I've been alive. Um, I have uh, found that people have enjoyed my approach, enjoyed my opinions, and enjoyed my philosophy on things. I think it's primarily because I don't have necessarily the nostalgia glasses that helps me. I can appreciate simplicity in something like this because like I can do things with this. Like the mention of the Forsaken Necromancer, I'm very certain would not have existed in a 5e scope because it would just been, they would have ran roughshod through it and not been challenged at all. So I guess what I'm basically saying is thank you for all the support. Thank you for all the positive vibes and words and reviews and stuff like that. You know, I don't like to put myself as part of a collective. I'm very much an individualist, but I do appreciate the sentiment when people say things like welcome to the community and stuff like that. So, like, I do appreciate it. I thank you for it. I thank you for. I never thought that I'd reach 250 whatever subscribers I have now, but here I am, and I appreciate it. So I've made a lot of friends. I've made a lot of YouTube friends as well, and it's been cool. And I'm looking forward to many, many years of doing this. Time is very much a resource. So again, as 2025 rolls in, I thank you. I hope you'll still be here for whatever other material I put out there. So, as always, guys, take care. God bless. And I'll see you on the other side.